This is one of the novels that I have chosen to spotlight during FebRegency. This is Camilla, or A Picture of Youth, and it says by the author of Evelina and Cecilia, as quite often the books written by women, actually in the 1800s and the 1700s. As you can see, this one was published in the 1700s. Quite often, women authors, their names were not actually on the book. Same thing happened with Jane Austen as well. The author was Fanny Burney, and this is actually her third published novel. She published one as a young woman in her late 20s in the 1770s, and then her second book, Cecilia, in the early 1780s. She took a bit of a break between writing novels, and I'll tell you a bit more about that when I flip the page. So let's see, what do you know else about Camilla? Well, it's interesting. It was her third book, and she actually was quite popular, even though her books didn't have her name on them. Like, she was kind of discovered, word got around, she kind of became popular in literary circles. And her first book, she didn't make very much money on. She actually couldn't, as a woman, she couldn't approach a publisher herself. And so one of her brothers actually pretended like he was the writer of Evelina, and he got a publisher to buy it. But he didn't really quite know how to negotiate these sort of things. And he was only paid 20 guineas for the book. And that's, I believe, period, total. And 20 guineas, that is actually equal to about 21 pounds. And even back in 1775 or 1776, whenever the publisher actually purchased this, even back then, what money was worth then, 20 guineas, 21 pounds, was not a lot of money. By the time she got to Camilla, much, much better remuneration for her. What I read is that over the course of however often it was published, and was published both in an abridged and an unabridged edition, and the edition you're looking at right now, you can't really tell. This is from the 5-volume unabridged set. I believe the abridged set is also 5 volumes, but just like little bits and pieces are taken out of it throughout the different chapters. So for all of the editions, she actually made £1,000, which back then for a book was a lot of money. And after she did the first initial print runs, and I guess as things were petering out, she actually sold a copyright for another £1,000. Of the two different books that I chose this one because it is very close for the being at the start of the what we call the Long Regency, which is 1795, and the proper Regency period where the Prince Regent was actually the Prince Regent, not just the Prince of Wales like he would have been at this time. That started in 1811 and went until his father's death in 1820 when he became George IV. And I thought it'd be fun to pick one from the very beginning or as close to the beginning as possible, and then pick another one right at the start of the Regency itself to spotlight here for this FebRegency. And so I also want to share a couple other key pages from this book, because there's some interesting things here. There's a Jane Austen connection, which I'll get to in just a few minutes. Okay, one of the next things that's interesting is actually on the next page, I believe. Yes. So this is a little dedication to the Queen. Not an uncommon thing back then. But what's interesting is if you're a fan of shall we say, a particular popular Regency romance drama on one of our streaming services, this refers to that queen. Yes, Queen Charlotte. And so what's interesting about Fanny Burney is because she published these books in the 1770s, 1780s, one of the things that she actually did for a few years, she actually was a keeper of the robes for Queen Charlotte. She was actually an intimate of the Queen. It was kind of like an interesting thing because she was unmarried, She actually didn't marry until much later in life. I believe she was in her early 40s when she actually married. Just a few years before she wrote Camilla was when she got married. And so she spent a few years on as a part of the royal court, and she kind of struggled with it because, like, she was like, of course, it's an honor, and her father definitely encouraged her to do it. The money was actually pretty good. I mean, not like people really thought about money like that as much as we do, but like especially like more of a gently bred family. But still, hey, if you can make a little money, more than she's making on her books, kind of a thing. Her dad, just gently encouraged, hey, it's an honor, it's a nice salary, consider doing it. But she found it didn't quite work with her personality, and it kind of took her away from writing. She actually remained friends with Queen Charlotte and the princesses, like until everybody's respective deaths. Like, she was a friend of Queen Charlotte until Queen Charlotte died, and she continued to be friends with the princesses. They would regularly correspond to each other until Fanny Burney's death. And what also is interesting here is you can really tell more from this page than from the previous page, is because this was published in 1796, we have some pretty peculiar looking typography here. And this is when we're still using the long S and ligatures. I'll go into a little bit more information about that. It was predominant in the earlier part of the 1700s, and it started to peter out into the 1800s, even though all the way through the Regency, you would occasionally see a book with the long S and the ligatures, although much less than, say, 100 years before. So it's an interesting change in the way, like the way English is even presented through typefaces. And so you see, like, the very first line there, that goodness, and the first S is done as a long S, and pretty much any place you see a double S, it'll look like that. And so sometimes it makes things a little tricky to read. And then you see in the third line down, with diverting respect, see how the C connects to the T? That is called a ligature, and also a very popular thing. And so as part of the fun is if you can actually watch the video books along with listening to the audio, because that's what I'll be doing for both Camilla and Sense and Sensibility during FebRegency. If you can actually read along, it's kind of interesting, will your brain get used to it? Will your eye get used to it? As I have actually been reading some of these to share for things that I cannot get through LibriVox, but I would love to share for FebRegency. Sometimes I'll admit I can stumble a bit. Now, did they mean to say should that be an F or an S? And if you can actually look at it, like in the goodness, you see there's just like a little tiny half of a crossbar hanging off of the left-hand side of what we think of looks like an F. I think you might be able to see that little teeny tiny half crossbar that inspires the word next to it. So especially in these older books, I mean, this is a really old edition. Yes, they degrade pretty quickly. I mean, it's just paper. And so sometimes they're not always the best looking. So it can be a challenge. You'll see when I share those videos that, it can be a little bit of a struggle when you're reading this yourself. So just enjoy just looking at the old typography, the old words, the old ways of doing things. And then there's one other page that I want to share with you here from this, and this is the Jane Austen Fanny Burney connection. Now, essentially, in terms of like how they would have related to each other, so to speak, Fanny Burney was about like a generation older than Jane Austen. So she was in her early 40s when this book came out, early to mid 40s, and Jane Austen was 19 to 20 or so when this book came out. Now, this is another interesting thing about this book and things that happened with books back in the day. You see at the top of this, it says subscribers. Now, we don't actually have like the first, probably would have been a couple of pages of this. This edition, it's actually the only edition that I could find online. It actually was supplied by Oxford University, I believe, and scanned by Google. I don't know if it was like a Google thing or the edition of the book, but there's a few missing pages. There's a few weird pages and all that. But aside from that, this is a list of subscribers. This is like old school crowdsourcing for books back in the day. Because at this point, this was her third book, she had developed a following. And what you could actually do is, like, say you wanted to have a good sized print run because your books were popular. If word got out that your book was coming out, basically people would be wanting to buy it. And so you'd want to have a bigger print run. And so this is a way to both kind of gauge customer interest and get a little money. Is basically people could subscribe, and there's like different levels of subscriptions and different things you could do. But what basically happened is that people would say, okay, yeah, I know Fanny Burney is coming out with this new book. I commit to buying 4 sets, 5 sets, 1 set, however many. And you would put like down, it was typically about half of what you would pay for it. Then the book is published with that money coming directly to pay for the printing and all the costs associated with getting a book out. And what's interesting is that people could also like make personalized books. It's like, say we have here like, the dukes and duchesses and marquises and countesses and earls, right? And they could actually choose, like, say, yes, and I would like to have the leather-bound copy, and I would like to have my family crest stamped on it. Because books were so handmade back then, they were crazy expensive, which is why a lot of people didn't buy books and why circulating libraries were so popular, because people couldn't afford books. I mean, I saw some sort of a quote somewhere, like basically like a book could cost as much, like almost as much as a standard person's wage would be like almost like a month's wage. So you had to usually be pretty wealthy to buy a book. And because they were really handmade, they actually could be made to order. Do you want leather? Do you want a certain kind of paper? Do you want a certain kind of something? I actually have seen some books that I've worked on with distributed proofreaders where they actually will say, we made the 600 copies basically with the cheap paper, and here we made another 100 copies with the expensive paper, and these are numbered, and this is what they are. And so it's actually really fascinating how publishing has evolved, and not evolved, but we have crowdsourcing for things now too, probably not so much for books, but maybe for documentaries or things based off of books, but I don't want to digress. But what's interesting in this, look at this top section that has the A's, the end of the A's. Look down at that second one from the bottom. Look who one of the subscribers to this book is. Miss Jane Austen of Steventon. So yes, our Miss Jane Austen was actually a subscriber for this book. She supported Fanny Burney by putting her money down to buy this book. I just think that's so cool. I just love that connection. And I also found it intriguing, like looking at the start of the B's, is how basically it isn't in strict alphabetical order. Like, the A's, it kind of looks like it's alphabetical order. Andrews, Angerstein. It's, a nice alpha order. It's first done by rank, right? So we have the dukes, the duchesses that start with B, and then within the alphabetical order within the dukes and the duchesses, and then we go down to marquis and the countess and earl and viscount and the right honorable and all that good stuff. And then I guess like after this page, we're going to start to get the quote more common people. Apparently the Beauforts were big fans. We got a copy for His Grace, a copy for Her Grace, and a copy for the second Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess. So that's pretty, I just found that highly, highly interesting. Let's talk about another potential Jane Austen Fanny Burney connection. Camilla was published in 1796. And I've done some research on that on the internet, and I can't find the precise month that it was published. And we know that Jane Austen started writing the book that became Pride and Prejudice in October of 1796, and she finished that first draft in August of 1797. When Camilla was published, either Jane Austen had read it earlier that year or she was reading it while she was working on Pride and Prejudice. There weren't many novels that were done in this time period. And so we know that she was already a big fan. I mean, she was a subscriber of this particular book of Camilla with Fanny Burney. So there's no real way to say for certain if she was influenced while she was writing Pride and Prejudice by this book in particular. But now I feel like I'm going to be looking through this with a bit more interest, wondering if indeed, there's elements that Jane just kind of, was inspired by what Fanny Burney did in this book. It's kind of a cool and interesting idea to follow. And there's another author that Jane Austen was a big fan of too, and that's Maria Edgeworth. And she is the one who wrote Belinda, which we actually read as a group for FebRegency 2024. And I remember when I was reading that along with in that FebRegency, how much I was impressed. I can definitely see parts in from Jane Austen's books where they seem to be inspired by different parts and scenes in Belinda. In particular, just like Pride and Prejudice, Belinda has several different marriage proposal scenes. And there's elements in those marriage proposal scenes that were definitely in Pride and Prejudice. She appreciated writing by other fantastic authors, and she just kind of soaked it up, and then she just made it her own, made it better, heightened the whole aspect of novel writing at that time, I think anyway. So, as I'm listening to this book, I'll be thinking, is there any other connection between Camilla and Jane Austen, and specifically Pride and Prejudice, than just Jane Austen's name in this subscriber list? Let's talk just a little about the book, and I will put links in the description about where to download a free ebook for it at Project Gutenberg, and where you can get access to the audio files that I have used that are from LibriVox. And for this particular book, this is a true group effort by the LibriVox volunteers. I think each narrator only does definitely does a chapter, but maybe a chapter or two. But it's not like one narrator all the way through. It's not like a dramatic one where the people speaking to different characters. And so you really see a range, and it's all volunteer run, and people just give their good time, effort, and energy. And I thank them for it. Their hearts are in it. Project Gutenberg for the ebook or just to read online, LibriVox for that recording. And I'll also put the link if you just wanted to thumb through this book yourself. In chapter, I think it's chapter 4 in this book, I did have an issue. It's like one of the longer chapters in it. It's actually 45 minutes. I've been trying to keep these recordings at 20 minutes. So I usually do 1 chapter, 2 chapters, depending. But I'm not going to split up a chapter. So chapter 4 is going to be long. It's about 40 minutes. Unfortunately, there is 1 page that's completely missing. And this is the only copy of this particular volume of the unabridged. I found an abridged version, but it's definitely abridged. It's missing parts of the scene, parts of paragraphs, different things. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle that. I might pull that over and just cross out the top and the bottom that doesn't fit. And then, hey, words are going to be missing in places, but this is the best I could do. Or I just might let the page hang out as it is in this book. We'll see how I'm going to handle that when we get there. So about this story itself, it's really interesting. It's a 5-volume set. And so this really takes Camilla from being a very young girl up through courtship and all that good stuff like these kind of books did. But she starts when she's quite a little girl. The first chapter, I like the way it just kind of is set up. Where it gives you just a little bit of information, actually mostly about the parents. And then the father's older brother, who's actually a baronet, he essentially wants to move closer to his brother. He used to have this big active life, but now he's not feeling so well in his older age. And so he feels like he just wants to be around family and around these young children. And boy, is Sir Hugh entering their lives going to change everything for all of them. I have to say, too, he's just an interesting character, period. But also that chapter 4 that I mentioned, It's so funny. It's like this whole big long extended scene where all of the kids of the Tyrol family and plus a few other young people, it's like a big ball that they are all going to. And it's definitely worthy of like the costume dramas that we all just absolutely adore. In fact, as I'm listening to it, as I'm flipping the page, I'm going, oh my gosh, I can totally see this being a part of a costume drama for sure. I could totally see it fitting into Bridgerton and other things like that. And the description, like this one guy who's a fop, his clothes are like literally so tight that the guy who's commenting on him is, yeah, how does he even bend? If he bends, he's just like gonna break in half. And so just so funny. And I hadn't actually read this one before, unlike the Sense and Sensibility. And so I'm really approaching it with fresh eyes. And the language is definitely very old-fashioned. I mean, even more old-fashioned than Jane Austen. And it's a little awkward to actually read with all the long S's and the ligatures. But at least like your brain can kind of skip over that if you are listening to it as well. And I'm going to be trying to include definitions like superimposed on the screen of words that just may or may not trip people up. Because again, they use much more formal language and they also use words differently. I know that word, but I don't know that meaning of the word. That's definitely a thing. So I thought for this one for sure, and I'll probably do it for Sense and Sensibility going forward. I'm still learning new video tricks. I'll be adding those definitions around the screen so you go, oh, okay, that's what that means. And I'm looking forward to just continuing to see how this book shapes up. It's a revelation of discovery for me. And of course, in this FebRegency period, I won't be finishing this video book version. The audio portion is actually over 40 hours long. And as I'm trying to break it down into 20-minute chunks to make it nice and digestible for my viewers out there. Yeah, I won't be getting that finished in FebRegency. So I'm going to continue posting these video books for both this book, Camilla, and for Sense and Sensibility until they're just done. And then I'll probably do other ones because I have found this like so enjoyable, such a fun way to do it. I love seeing these books. If you were a fan of Fanny Burney and you heard like in 1795 that she was going to be publishing a whole new novel when she hadn't published one in like over 10 years, she was going to be publishing another one in 1796. And maybe you became a subscriber and you helped pay for things. And then that book finally came out. This was the book you would have held in your hand. This is a book you would have paged through yourself. And so I think it's so fun to go through, and we are actually looking at the words as they looked at them back in the day. Long S's and ligatures and all of that. Anyway, I hope you enjoy these video books that I'm doing. I actually think they're really fun to make. I think they're really fun to look at, and I am planning to continue to do them. And so I hope you've stumbled along this channel and decided this is a fun idea too. Please subscribe if you're interested, and check out the videos, like, comment, all that good stuff. And happy FebRegency.